Hey folks, this is Kelani. One of the most anticipated boss fights in the new Sanctum of Domination raid became available for testing, Keltuzadd. Yes, we're facing off against everyone's favourite Lich once again, and he will be the second to last boss in the new raid. So let's have a look at all his abilities and how the fight is shaping up overall. This fight is going to be a long one, but you won't have too many different phases to learn. You start in phase 1, and then when you get the boss's health down to 0, you enter a kind of transition phase where the boss starts to cast a one-shot AoE. During this time, you can enter the boss's phylactery to attack his soul directly. When the soul ad loses a third of its health, you transition back into phase 1, and you do the whole fight over again. You go back and forth between these two phases until you kill the soul remnant of Keltuzadd, at which point phase 3 starts and you can finally kill the boss for good. Every time you go back into phase 1, the boss gets stronger and each ability is used more often, so it's going to get harder and it's going to be a long fight, but you won't actually have to memorize too many different phases because the fight kind of just repeats over and over again. Let's check out the phase 1 abilities first. Soul Fracture deals a lot of damage to the tank with aggro and fractures their soul. Soul Shard ads will spawn around the room and start chain casting Piercing Wail, which deals a bunch of raid-wide AoE damage. They can be interrupted and silenced though. Now each soul shard ad that is alive applies a stack of soul exhaustion onto the tank, increasing the physical damage they take by 500%. So you have to kill all of the soul shard ads ASAP, your tank needs to run on over to them to pick up the tattered pieces of their soul, and then they can go back to tanking. If they don't collect all their soul shards within 1 minute, they instantly die, so these ads will be a top priority. The boss will also use Oblivion's Echo. This applies a debuff to random players that silences any allies within 10 yards of the targeted player, and after 6 seconds you drop an AoE on the floor that also silences anyone who walks in it. You want to take these to the outside of the room to maximize floor space, but you can also drop these silencing fields onto the soul shard ads to silence them as well, so you don't have to worry about interrupting the Piercing Wail as often, which is kind of cool. Another important ability is Glacial Wrath. The boss will summon glacial spikes at random player locations. The swirl that spawns them deals a bit of damage, but that's not really the problem here. Glacial spikes lose 5% of their health every 2 seconds, so they can only survive for a maximum of 40 seconds, and when they die they explode for raid-wide AoE damage and they apply a nasty dot to your entire raid. If you kill 2 of these things at the same time, or you just let them expire at the same time, you can die very easily. So you'll need to target one to stagger their deaths so your healers have time to top everyone up before the next spike explodes. His next ability is Frost Blast. The boss marks a random target with a huge frosty AoE swirl that deals a massive amount of AoE damage, split amongst everyone who gets hit. To survive this, you'll want a lot of players to stack together to split the damage, but it also leaves a heavy damage over time magic effect on everyone who gets hit, and it roots them. You will probably want to use a master spell after this ability goes off, or specifically have players who can easily break roots help soak the damage, like hunters and druids. The boss will also cast Dark Evocation. This ability does 2 things. First, it summons some frostbound devoted ads that fixate on random players. If they reach their target, they explode, dealing a lot of damage within 5 yards and knocking everyone back. These just need to be CC'd, slowed and nuked down. This ability also resurrects any dead players and mind controls them, which is absolutely hilarious, but quite problematic as you can imagine. So any extra deaths makes this fight a lot harder because they're going to get rezzed every single time the boss uses this ability. When the boss's mana is depleted, he'll also cast Howling Blizzard. This spawns a bunch of frost patches all over the encounter area that deal a lot of damage if you stand in them. They also grow in size over 20 seconds and eventually explode, dealing a lot of damage to anyone within 8 yards. There is always an area of the room with fewer ice patches, so try to find that quickly and your entire raid needs to move on over there. When phase 2 starts, Keltuzadd will start casting Necrotic Destruction. If he manages to finish the cast, he will nuke your entire raid with massive AoE damage and force the phase change back to phase 1. To avoid this ability, you have to go into Keltuzadd's phylactery and damage the remnant of Keltuzadd ad. To get to the Soul Remnant, you just have to walk into the boss and use your extra action button that appears, and the most important ability of the downstairs that you need to understand is Necrotic Obliteration. When the ad gets to 66% and 33% health, it becomes immune to damage and starts casting Necrotic Obliteration, which will one-shot anyone who remains in the phylactery zone, but it also stops Kel'Thuzad from casting Necrotic Destruction upstairs and forces him back into Phase 1. So the goal here is to get the ad to 66% the first time, then leave quickly so no one dies, then when you come back in the next time you get it down to 33%, then leave again, and the third time you come back and finish it off, which also triggers Phase 3. There are a few other abilities you have to watch out for if you're part of the downstairs group. Shadow Fissure creates random swirls all over the platform that deal a lot of damage and knock you back, so as long as you don't get hit, they won't cause you any problems. The Remnant will also cast Freezing Blast. He faces a direction and shoots a line of ice that deals a lot of damage and roots anyone who gets hit. You can see very clearly which way the ability will be cast, so just don't stand in front of the big telegraph cast and you should be fine. Anyone inside the phylactery will also take constant damage over time from Necrotic Miasma, and this effect stacks. So the longer you are in this area, the more damage over time you take, so your downstairs group will most likely need at least one healer. And then when the Remnant is below 33%, he will also use Glacial Winds, which summons tornadoes that deal damage and root anyone who gets hit. So the last push on this ad is going to be just a bit harder. Now, even though you need to get the ad down to 66%, 33%, and then 0% each time you go in, you can't send all of your DPS downstairs because Kel'Thuzad will also summon a bunch of ads for you to take care of in the boss room. Unstoppable Abominations need to be picked up by your tanks and faced away from the raid. They only have one ability, Demolish, but it deals a bunch of damage in a straight line, so as long as they're faced away from the raid and they're killed quickly, they shouldn't cause too many problems. Then you also get Soul Reavers. These are slow-moving banshees which cast Banshee's Cry. Every 1 second they deal damage to a random raid member, but this can and should be interrupted. Thanks to their empowered cry ability, every successful cast of Banshee's Cry increases the damage done of Banshee's Cry by 25%, and that stacks. So interrupt them as much as possible and nuke them down seems to be the answer here. And then you also get a few of the Frostbound Devoted ads, so be sure to move away from them if you're the target of their corpse detonation and nuke them down just like in Phase 1. Now when Kel'Thuzad goes back into Phase 1, either by finishing his cast of Necrotic Destruction or by the Soul Remnant ad getting to the required percentage health, any ads left alive become empowered, dealing 25% extra damage and becoming immune to crowd control and interrupts, so you really want all of the ads to be dead by the time the phase push happens. Splitting your group up is going to be a balancing act here. You'll want to kill all of the ads before Kel'Thuzad becomes active again, but you also want to get the Soul Remnant down to 66, 33 and then 0% each time you enter the phase, otherwise you'll just die to the massive AoE damage. In addition to all of that, each time the boss comes back into Phase 1, he will gain a stack of Necrotic Surge. This increases his damage done by 5%, and each stack also increases the number of players targeted by Oblivion's Echo and Glacial Wrath. The extra silencing AoEs aren't that big of a deal, but the extra Glacial Spikes mean you have to be very careful with how you stagger them, and you have to be on the ball with nuking them down. And then when you finally kill the Soul Remnant, Phase 3 starts. It's more or less exactly the same as Phase 1, except the boss will no longer use Soul Fracture or Glacial Wrath, so that's 2 bad abilities gone, but he will summon all of the ads from the intermission phase, so you have another round of ads to deal with, on top of most of Phase 1 abilities. When he summons the ads, any dead players are also revived and mind controlled, just to add into the fun. I imagine you'll want to burn the boss down ASAP at this point, but we'll have to wait and see what the most ideal strategy is going to be. But that's our first look at the Kel'Thuzad boss encounter in the 9.1 Sanctum of Domination raid.